You're welcome to the Policy Council. My name is Okwemi Agbaje. Today we've returned to the economy, and my guest is a professor of economics, someone who has worked in the banking and capital market as well, and who has worked at the United Nations Economic Agency. Together we'll examine a few issues around the Nigerian economy. Enjoy the program. You're welcome back to the Policy Council. My guest today is the head of Department of Economics at the University of Lagos. He's the former special assistant to a former director general at the Nigerian Stock Exchange. He's worked at the United Nations Economic Commission for Africa as head of investment, chief of financing, industry and investment, and he's a professor of economics. Professor Ndubisi Ifeanyi Nwokoma, you're welcome to the Policy Council.
Thank you very much.
You're welcome, sir. Now, let me start, since I see that you've worked in the capital market for some time. Let me ask you, and you're a fellow of the Chartered Institute of Stockbrokers.
Yeah.
So, we've seen remarkable recovery on the capital market after the downturn of 2008, 2009.
Yeah.
What factors do you think are driving the recovery? And are there risks? Is there another danger of another collapse in your view?
Yeah, if you take a look at the capital market, you discover that most of the stocks are banking stocks that are in the market presently, over time. And if you have a market where you have 60% of the stocks, as banking stocks, then the banking sector is very, very important in what happens to the market. That's the critical thing. So I think the problems that we had in the market then, even though it's partly external, well, to some extent, but also what happened to the banks then. And the banks had problems. And the issue of investment banking, where banks had their own stockbroking firms, their prices were somehow manipulated, and things like that. And so the problem of banking came to the market, and that was really what I think was critical in terms of what happened to the market then. And so when we had the banking sector reforms by the current governor, when he came on stream, even though there are areas that could be done, somehow differently. But at least try to clean up the banks and try to get the real value for the stocks for these banks. So when that was done, I think to some extent there was some kind of sanity that came to the market, and that helped to bring about stability. And then, well, it went down first before coming up. So I think what happened in the banks is critically
so is it eureka? Is it investors can go to sleep believing that now the market is recovering, or do we still have this? Do you think, what's the probability of a second or another capital market?
Yes, I think the critical issue is regulation. You have to make sure you have appropriate regulation. SEC should be well constituted, do their jobs, as policemen, as market developers, develop the market, and make sure that infractions are addressed, as they occur. And so if we're able to have, some good regulation in the market, and it's going to give some measure of confidence to an average investor that he can actually come in. But, for every market, there are always risks. But the issue is, how do you manage those risks and make sure that they don't become out of control. So I think any market, the US, New York Exchange, Tokyo, and all that, there are always risks, depending on what happens in the corporate sector,
in the political environment,
so many variables, exactly. Sector. But just for you to manage your own house and make sure. But with all things being equal, I think people can invest.
There's this controversy over SEC itself.
Yeah.
The National Assembly refused to budget any funds for it, but the agency has managed to continue running. The commission has managed. What do you think? What about the substantive issues? There was this probe at the capital market and all of that, and the stock exchange, or the House of Representatives in particular, and the National Assembly as a whole, believes that the SEC DG, because you say this is about regulation, they believe that she should be removed from office. Do you have any views on all of that?
In my opinion, I think SEC probably overreached at some point because there were allegations, you know, there were actions taken based on allegations, and then you had to now begin to find out after the fact.
Yeah.
I think those are issues that I don't know if there were other reasons why that happened. So people now began to question the neutrality of SEC, or whether SEC has some other agenda. So I think that is an issue people are still trying to come to terms with, about the integrity of SEC, whether they can actually do the job without any sentiments or any biases against any parties in the issue. I think that is the question that many people still are trying to contend with. National Assembly SEC imbroglio, I think it's something that is in the public domain, and people have formed their opinion on what it is or what is not. And some have even advised her to resign or whatever. You know, these are issues left to her and to the government to resolve. Yes.
Okay, let's take a short time out. I'm with Professor Ndubuisi Nwokoma. He's the head of Department of Economics at the University of Lagos, a professor of economics. We'll be right back. You're welcome back. It's the Policy Council, and I'm with Professor Ndubuisi Nwokoma, Head of Economics at the University of Lagos. Prof, you served at, as I mentioned in my introduction, you worked at the United Nations Economic Commission for Africa, as during your sabbatical, I imagine, as chief. Okay, leave of absence, as chief of financing, industry, and investment. First of all, explain the role and function of the UNECA itself, and then your role as chief of financing.
The UNECA is a commission that is meant to address the economic development issues for African member states. Okay, so the UNECA, liaises with the various governments, Nigeria, Cameroon, South Africa, Egypt, and so on, and advises them on direction of policy, what they should do, what sectors to focus on, maybe industrialization as the focus now. To manage their finances, the flow of money out of the continent. It has been found, from the studies that Africa is bleeding. The money that's saving Africa is more than the FDI we are asking for. These are things we do, so I find that if Africa can actually stop the bleeding of money laundering, money, corruption, the outflow of capital, from Africa is much more than all these ODAs and FDIs we are asking for. If we don't get a single ODA or FDI in Africa, and we just try to minimize the bleeding, Africa will be a lot better off. These are issues, work done by EC, which was part of my job there.
How will Africa industrialize? Let's take Nigeria. How will Nigeria industrialize?
I think the focus now is to move away from exporting commodities. Nigeria exports oil, Ghana exports cocoa, maybe gold, Cote d'Ivoire gold, and so on. All these countries, most countries in Africa exports commodities. Now the issue is to add value to those commodities, value addition, and that is by trying to industrialize, even at a small level. Just add some value before you export. But now most African countries and foreign exchange by just growing, selling it.
Primary commodity.
Exactly.
In Nigeria, let me take your view on this controversial issue. In Nigeria, we export crude oil. We don't refine.
Yes.
Now, we can abuse government that they didn't build refineries and we are exporting. But if you understand economics, you may also be able to argue that we, the people, have said we don't want refineries because we want petroleum subsidy to continue. Do you have a perspective on that? My hypothesis, which I'm suggesting, is the tension of petroleum subsidies. Is it not the cause of the absence of refining in Nigeria?
I don't think so. Refining, the problem of refining has been there before the issue of subsidy. In the 70s and so on, and much later, we had refineries that were working.
Which were built by government.
Built by government, and they were working. And somehow along the line, things got out of hand, corruption and all that, and they kept on breaking down. You had tolerant maintenance coming up. Worry today is on. Kaduna is off tomorrow. We keep on hearing such stories in the media. So the problem have always been there, and it's because there's this high demand for petroleum products that the issue of trying to import came, and then the issue of the differential in the price of oil, in the world market, and what is the benchmark, the amount put by government to sell those crude to the refineries. These issues came up, and the issue of trying to subsidize that if we now pay for the real value, that it could cause some social unrest. For example, in Ethiopia, I was there for some time, at the ECA. The price of fuel changes regularly. You go to fill your car, to fuel your car, you go today, it is maybe 20 barrel per liter. Barrel is their currency in Ethiopia. The next time you go out, it's 15 barrel. It changes. In
relation to changes in the global market.
Exactly.
But it doesn't happen here because it's subsidized.
Exactly. So people there are used to it. The time they had the problem in Libya, they had problems, prices are always going up. It went up and people got used to it. So the subsidy issue is because government tries to cushion all those fluctuations outside and tries to make sure that the price remains at 97 or whatever, no matter what the price is outside. So the issue is just because of this cushion by government, to the public, in this regard.
Okay. Let's take a short time out, and we'll be back with Professor Nwokoma.
Government wants our city to become a mega modern city. And so, government is providing modern markets for us to carry out our business. Now, this requires money. So, we need to pay our taxes to help government to help us. I pay my taxes. I hope you've paid yours. I pay. Pay your tax. It's your civic responsibility. It's your duty. It's the law.
You're welcome back to the Policy Council. My guest is still Professor Nwokoma of the University of Lagos, Department of Economics. Prof, we're talking about the economy, Nigerian economy. What are your thoughts on the structure of our GDP? We have this economy in which, first of all, on income side, oil sales predominantly. In terms of outputs, in the GDP figures, agriculture, oil, wholesale and retailing. It's not a very broad-based structure. First, what are your thoughts about the structure of our GDP? What do we have to do to that structure? Is it okay? Is it optimal? Or is there a better structure? How do we create a better structure? That's one. Secondly, or maybe I'm burdening you too much at the same time, but I'm very interested in knowing why we have GDP growth. 7% on average for the last few years, and yet is not impacting poverty and unemployment.
Yeah. On the first question, I think if you take a look at the Nigerian economy, it needs to be restructured. That was the thinking during the era of SAP, trying to something structural adjustment program. The critical thing is to adjust the structure of production and the structure of consumption. Because so that if we're able to move away the engine of growth from the oil to other sectors, then we're trying to diversify the base of the economy. And the economy, is like a yo-yo, dancing to the tune of what happens to the price of oil, externally. So actually, the control is not within. It's a variable that is exogenous to us. It's outside our control. So we just sit down one day and the price is $100,
and we will be happy.
We are happy. The next day, it becomes $30 or whatever, or 40, and we are sad. So it's something that we need to look at and do something about it. And I think the issue is to look for, where do we go? Do we need to develop our agriculture? What can we produce that we can actually sell and get value for? Industrialization is something
which you've mentioned earlier.
Quite critical for us to now say, let the economy grow on industry. Take a look at the Asian tigers. How did they develop? Countries like Hong Kong, or well, they say a territory like Hong Kong, you have South Korea, you have Malaysia. These countries, they grew by industrializing their economy, small scale. Add some value to your commodities, and then you now be able to, produce to consume first and foremost.
Yes.
The next thing you now produce to export. When you are producing to consume, you see all the all the problems, and you're able to correct it before you can now sell to others. These are issues.
And then there's a domestic value chain.
Exactly.
Generates jobs.
Forward linkages, backward linkages, you know. So these are issues that, but you know, the problem in Nigeria that so many outside factors, you know, not making us to arrive at that destination. Infrastructure is a critical issue. Anybody who wants to open a small factory has to provide its own water, its own light, its own road, its own security, and all that. These are issues that government has to address. If not, we're just, you know, speaking grammar, you know, from what, you know, at least from common parlance. I think the issue is that government needs to have a program and to work at it. And one issue is the issue of power. It's very critical. Unless you address the power issue in Nigeria, all this talk is just mere talk to neutralize and all that. So as we are now, the economy is largely oil-based. Today, tomorrow, the way it is, it's largely oil-based, unless we actually see how we can go out. So the structure is not okay. The other issue about
GDP
growing so much, that is what is a problem in the Arab Spring country, well, in Arab countries, Tunisia, and so on, Libya and all that, where you had this problem, all this uprising. Those countries were growing quite well. If you look, you know, see those countries, it's not only even in Asia, but you find that the growth has not been inclusive. So there's the discourse now in the literature about inclusive growth. The classical economists feel that open up the markets, let anybody, it will trickle down.
Everybody will get out of poverty.
The trickle down has not been trickling down. The trickle down issue has not been working. Government now needs to come and make sure that everybody is brought into the picture, so that when we have this growth of 100% or 10% or 7%, there is an effort by government to make sure that this growth is shared by all. There was a study we did at the UNECA, you know, the role of the state in governing development, and it was found out that the state cannot stand aloof and watch the market, you know, be at play. The state must be able to, why allow the market to be able to work? You have to make sure that all the economic agents play their role appropriately, and that you protect the vulnerable in society. So the language is governing development. The state must actually come back to the picture and not just say private sector should do their job. No.
Forces rule.
The states has to come in, and take a look at Asia. Asia grew by dictators. You see all these countries that actually grew. You know, South Korea, they had people in power for a long time. So the state was strong. Singapore, for a long time, somebody will be in power for a very long time, and he will govern development. Even if they somewhere get corrupt, they had made serious impact on society. And you can see the thing is irreversible. So we need to have the state to actually come in and govern development. And we can now see this growth, you know, coming down to everybody.
Let's take a final time out, and I'll be back with Professor Nwokoma.
Who knows a bit better thing? Abi who know like better thing? All these fine things where they see so. Now money government they take do now. Abi, I think it's like, you know, I mean, excuse me, I dey pay my tax. I dey do it, I dey pay my tax. Say you don't pay your own tax. If you pay your tax, I pay. Oh.
Pay your tax. It's your civic responsibility. It's your duty. It's the law.
You're welcome back. It's the last segment of my discussion with Professor Nwokoma, Head of Economics, University of Lagos. Prof, let's end this with the banking sector. You mentioned when we were speaking about the stock exchange that it dominates the capital market. It dominates our economy. And we've had these difficult reforms. We had the difficulties around 2009, and then the reforms, essentially the reversal of the universal banking policy. Some banks are still under government AMCON control, the creation of AMCON, which has accumulated some liabilities in excess of 5 trillion naira. A whole atmosphere, but then the corporate performance of the banks recently released shows that maybe the reforms have been have been healthy in terms of the results now coming out. What are your thoughts on this?
I want to tie this, what's happening in banking to your earlier question, the issue of development and inclusiveness. You know, the reforms, in my opinion, they are welcome. You know, with some comments, modifications, some comments by the side. The reform of Professor Soludo earlier in 2004-2005, you know, consolidation. I think that helped to strengthen the banking sector in terms of being able to address the problems of the real sector. You know, development.
It has stronger capacity.
Capacity to actually carry some, you know, big business and all that. And I think that helped to move the banking sector forward, in my opinion. And of course, the banks had too much money at their disposal, and they overreached in some sense. And the issues of this thing were not well addressed. Corporate governance issues and so on were not properly addressed. And then here comes Sanusi, you know, Lamido, who came, and in trying to address the issues of corporate governance, I think there were certain things that some gains that we had earlier, which were eroded. The issue of employment. Yes. Yeah, because if the banks had problems with their risk assets, you know, they didn't have not performing, and the issue was to make sure that they came back on track to actually address the purpose for which they are in business. I thought the issue would have been to why trying to address the other issues of governance, trying to make sure that whatever gains we had earlier were not washed away. That actually, you know, because we found that many people then had jobs in the banking industry, and the reform that came after should have been able to maintain that preserve those gains. And then it should have been the central objective of policy. Exactly, because all over the world now, jobs are critical issues. And you cannot just come around and say everything. And you now throw people out of job. And then you now say you want to kill a fly with a machine gun. If the fly is there, you can find another way of killing the fly and not pull down the whole house because you saw a fly. So we were being reckless. I think the reform was, in my opinion, slightly overreaching, and we will have been able to address the issue of risk assets and see how we can be able to change some management if need be, and try to see how we can keep jobs and expand the business, and then see how we can, you know, bring it up and recover the loan. So I think to that extent, those reforms took us back to where we were before some of those reforms. So that, in my opinion, is what happened. And I think that didn't really help employment. Because basically, as a government or a society, what are we actually driving at? Exactly. Is the people. The people. The welfare of the people. The people should come first in everything. Any policy, talking about markets, supply and demand, everything. Ultimately, we talk about the human condition. And that's what the Nigerian Constitution says. Yes. The role of government is the welfare and security of the people. That is the primary thing. So anything you are doing that you don't take people into consideration, you throw people out of job, and you say you are trying to reform and let there be, you know, informing assets and all that, and you create more problems. Now, the issue in Nigeria, you have unemployment is very, very high. For every 4 persons that leave school, about 1 or so, you know, gets a job, or thereabout, or 2. So it was not as bad 4 years ago. It's getting worse. And if there are policies that government should make or has to make now, it's about how to get people engaged. Let people do something. Let people do something. So the banking reforms, in my opinion, has achieved some results. The banks are doing well now, but they have to actually achieve more. And they've done it at the expense to expand their business and bring people back into employment. To that extent, I can say that they have done very well. But so far, well as regards the entities called banks, but those entities are nothing. They are nothing, if not for their role of economic the value they add to society. So in the banks are healthier, but you have been able to create many more problems, family problems, divorce, marriage, and all that issues of finance, and so I think they still need to do a lot more to expand the bank capacity to be able to absorb more people and then grow the economy. Professor Nwokoma says it's about the people ultimately, whether it's banking, whether it's telecommunications, whether it's whatever. We'll be right back. The point I take away from Professor Nwokoma is that whatever policy, whatever reforms
whatever economic activity, banking, telecoms, agriculture, the essence of it all, at the end of the day, is the welfare and security of the people. Policy has to put the welfare and the security and the progress and development of our people as its central objective. If it does everything else but negatively impacts the people, then that policy has been to no avail. Thank you very much for watching. See you next.